How is everybody this morning? Thank you. It's hot in here. I guess these windows don't open. Anyway, thank you for inviting me back. It's a pleasure and something of a surprise to be back here with you after my previous talk. Last time I was here, I spoke for a few minutes on the question, what is an atheist? It's a pretty broad topic, a good one to sort of let us get to know each other because it's so general. But this time around, since we've gotten to know each other a little bit, I have something more specific to talk with you about, and it's a subject I've actually been wanting to say some things about for some time, so I'm doubly happy to be back here with you today. In the next few minutes, I'm going to compare and contrast two lists which I'm sure are very familiar to all of you, in the hopes of showing them to you in a new light and offering you a different way of looking at them and at what they mean to us than maybe you've ever had before. The two lists I'm actually going to compare for you today are the Ten Commandments, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, and the Bill of Rights. And this time I've actually come prepared with visual aids, so if I can get the AV Club to lower the screen for me. Great. Thanks, Jesus geeks. Now then, the first thing we might notice when we compare the Ten Commandments and the Bill of Rights is that they have some things in common. For starters, the number 10. 10 Commandments, 10 Amendments. The Ten Commandments and the Bill of Rights have something else in common besides the number 10. They are both objects of reverence stretching far beyond the cultures that actually created them. The Ten Commandments are claimed as a basis of law and morality by modern Jews, Christians, and Muslims, all of whom could hardly be further removed from the ancient Israelites who originated them. And the Bill of Rights, along with the rest of the American Constitution, inspired similar documents in countries all over the world, well outside the borders of the United States. These facile similarities aside, the Ten Commandments and the Bill of Rights are actually very, very different documents. You all noticed, I'm sure, as you filed in this morning, that the title of this talk is The Ten Commandments versus the Bill of Rights. Some of you might have read that title and assumed that I, handsome, brash young atheist that I am going to argue that the unquestionably man-made Bill of Rights is superior to the supposedly God-made Ten Commandments. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Because the Ten Commandments versus the Bill of Rights implies that these two documents are going to duke it out with one another to determine a winner. And in a sense, that's what's about to happen. So let's analyze both documents in moral terms. What morality can we derive from the Ten Commandments? Well, let's take a look at the commandments, shall we? Number 1, you will have no other gods before me. Number 2, you shall not make for yourself an idol. Number 3, do not take the name of the Lord in vain. Number 4, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Number 5, honor your father and your mother. Let's stop there. We're halfway through 5 of the Ten Commandments supposedly given to Moses directly from God. The first 4 are entirely given over to God asserting his authority. In fact, this is, as you probably know, a popular way of dividing the Ten Commandments. The first 4 deal with God, the final 6 deal with man. Worship no other gods, make no idols, don't misuse my name, keep the Sabbath. These aren't moral laws designed to protect the Israelites or us from each other or to encourage the building of a free and peaceful society. They're the sort of rules that an overbearing parent would give his children to get them to behave. Worship no other gods doesn't require you to be a better person. It's a demand for respect from an authority and for obedience. And that demand for obedience is so important to God, or to whoever wrote the Ten Commandments, that it's repeated 4 times in a row. Those first 4 commandments are all variations on the same rule. Don't disrespect God. The 5th commandment, to honor your parents, seems pretty moral at first glance, but if you read the full verse of Exodus in which we find that commandment, you see something interesting. This is Exodus chapter 20, verse 12, the King James Version. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. God doesn't say, honor your mother and your father for its own sake, or because it's important to be grateful to people who have helped you, or just because it's the right thing to do. He dangles a carrot that your days will be long, and in the process manages to reassert his authority yet again upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Halfway through the 10 Commandments, and we are 0 for 5 for moral content. Respect the boss and do what he tells you no matter what is not a good moral lesson. But things do get a little better in the second half. A little better. Let's keep going. Number 6, you shall not murder. Number 7, you shall not commit adultery. Number 8, you shall not steal. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness. Number 10, you shall not covet. Now, remember at what point in the biblical narrative God bestows these laws. It's not in the Garden of Eden, when there were 2 humans, which seems like the ideal time for establishing the rules of a society. It's in the book of Exodus, when many, many, many generations have gone by. The Israelites have a society, they have a culture. More than that, they encounter other tribes with their own cultures. We're way beyond the point of laying down ground rules here. And when God finally does come down and decide to make some laws, what does he tell the Israelites about how they should treat one another? Don't kill each other. Don't steal from each other. Don't lie on each other. I'm not going to argue that there's no morality in the last 5 commandments. It's important for the health of any society that its members not feel at liberty to kill or rob each other. So important, so basic, in fact, that the Israelites, along with all of the other tribes that God chose not to speak to, by the way, must have figured out this much for themselves already. Again, the handing down of the 10 Commandments takes place long enough after the creation that humanity has formed multiple societies, spread out across the earth, built cities. Would they have gotten that far if they didn't value human life, personal property, and honesty? The last 5 commandments are perfectly moral. They're just redundant. The biblical Israelites don't seem to have been a particularly murderous, treacherous, thieving tribe before the 10 Commandments were handed down. Most of the time we do see them committing some horrific crime, it's because God told them to. If God was going to wait so long to lay down the law to his people, why not correct some of what they were doing wrong, instead of telling them what they already know? God doesn't forbid rape in the commandments or anywhere else in the Bible. In fact, he recommends it and even orders it several times. God doesn't forbid slavery in the commandments or anywhere else. Quite the opposite. He establishes rules for the buying and selling and treatment of slaves. There is a counter-argument. Many Christians, perhaps some of you, say that the 10 Commandments are not meant for the ancient Israelites exclusively, but for all people. That's why they are so general, and that's why they aren't uniquely tailored to the particular troubles of that society that supposedly first received them. But this doesn't really answer the problem. As I pointed out, there are other tribes in the Old Testament when God bestows the 10 Commandments on Moses. Tribes that didn't get the memo. Men and women in those tribes weren't murdering each other or robbing each other en masse, and as evidence for that, I cite the fact that those societies had endured and prospered to a point that many of them had stuff that the Israelites wanted and went to war to take. So those 5 moral commandments are obviously unnecessary. And as for not correcting the flaws of Israelite society because God wanted the commandments to apply to everyone, I can think of a few post-biblical civilizations who might have benefited from a ban on slavery and war. So the Ten Commandments. I'll be charitable and call them morally inadequate. But what about the Bill of Rights? What morality can we derive from that document? Well, let's take a look. First Amendment, free exercise of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, right to peaceably assemble, right to petition the government for redress of grievances. Second Amendment, right to bear arms. Third Amendment, protection against compulsory quartering of soldiers. Fourth Amendment, protection against unreasonable search and seizure, requirement of search warrants issued upon probable cause. Fifth Amendment, requirement of a grand jury indictment on charges of capital crimes, protection against double jeopardy, protection against self-incrimination, right to due process of law, right to just compensation for property taken for public use. Sixth Amendment, right to a speedy public trial by jury, right to know the charges against you, right to confront the witnesses against you, right to gather witnesses in your favor, right to counsel for your defense. Seventh Amendment, right to trial by jury in civil suits where the amount in dispute exceeds $20. Eighth Amendment, protection against excessive bail, protection against cruel and unusual punishment. Ninth Amendment, the rights enumerated here should not be construed as denying other rights to the people. 10th Amendment, powers not specifically granted to the United States government or prohibited to the states belong to the states or the people. Notice any difference compared to the Ten Commandments? The entire Bill of Rights is devoted to limiting authority, not fortifying it. Instead of ordering people to show ultimate respect to the authority, it requires the authority to respect the rights of the people. It doesn't demand obedience. It doesn't tell people what they can't do. It establishes what the people are entitled to. And what does the Bill of Rights tell us about the people who wrote it? What was important to them, and what did they think would be important to future generations? Respecting other people, treating those accused of crimes fairly, engaging with authority rather than cowering before it, and keeping the power of that authority limited and subject to the law and the will of the people. Christians believe that the Ten Commandments were written by the very hand of God, the source and the standard of all morality, and yet the man-made, extensively debated, committee-assembled, legislatively enacted Bill of Rights contains more useful morality in its first adopted amendment than we find in all 10 commandments combined. Unlike the Ten Commandments, which asserts the power of God, or, as I would argue, the power of those who claim to speak for God, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution of which it is a part establish the framework for a free and just society. And the priorities laid down by the Bill of Rights could not possibly be further removed from those of the Ten Commandments. Instead of reinforcing the powerful, the Bill of Rights requires us to be mindful of the powerless, of the accused, of the suspected, of those the government would deprive of their liberty or their property. The Ten Commandments includes no limitation on God's authority. In fact, nowhere in the Bible does God explicitly limit his authority. He can do whatever he wants to you. He has ultimate power over every aspect of your life. He is the Lord, and we are the serfs. And that is precisely the form of government that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were written to preclude. I've often heard Christians claim that the Bible, and specifically the Ten Commandments, is the basis of our law and our morality. And yet, when I look at the Declaration of Independence, which defied absolutist authority, when I look at the Constitution, which established a rule of law and a representative government empowered by the people, and when I look at the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to that Constitution, which limited the reach of that government and protected the rights of the people in dealing with it, I don't see the influence of the Ten Commandments. Freedom of religion. Where's that in the Bible? It's certainly not in the Ten Commandments. It's expressly forbidden in the very first commandment. Have no other gods before me. The first clause of the First Amendment. one of the strongest pillars of our free society, directly opposes the First Commandment. Hope I haven't turned any of you against the First Amendment. Freedom of expression, freedom of the press, not biblical ideals. Right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Do the Ten Commandments give the impression of a God who is open to dissent? Right to bear arms. The right to protect yourself not just from invading armies or from criminals, but from the government, should it ever overstep its prescribed authority. Where in the Bible does God grant his people the right to defend themselves against him? Right to refuse to quarter a soldier. I don't see the biblical inspiration for this one. The Ten Commandments stresses obedience to authority. And every time God or an angel appears in the Old Testament, they are met with all the worshipful groveling that a lord would expect from a cowering slave. Right to privacy, protection against unreasonable, warrantless searches. The Bible tells you that God sees everything you do and knows every single thought you have in your head. In the Judeo-Christo-Islamic worldview, there is no such thing as privacy. Protection against double jeopardy and self-incrimination. The rights of those accused of crimes are never mentioned in the Bible. Right to a trial by a jury of your peers. Rights of the accused to know the charges against them, to face their accusers, to have the assistance of counsel for their own defense. These are not God-given rights. These rights do not exist in the Bible. Protection against cruel and unusual punishment. God demands the death penalty, sometimes by public stoning, for anyone who breaks his divine law. The extension of additional rights not enumerated to the states and to the people. According to the Bible, you are only as free as God decides you should be. You are never at liberty. You are a slave. And you are expected to be glad of your chains, to paraphrase Christopher Hitchens. It's true I'm an atheist. It's true that I'm not coming at this from the middle. I've definitely chosen a side. I don't believe for a moment that the Ten Commandments, or indeed any other part of the Bible, is divinely inspired. I believe it to be the work of men, and primitive, ignorant men at that. I think we owe the Ten Commandments some deference as a piece of history, as a cultural artifact, but no more than we do the Code of Hammurabi or the Magna Carta, and as a work of literature, but certainly no more than we owe the Iliad or the Odyssey or the Homeric hymns. Give me the Bill of Rights, the indisputably, inarguably man-made Bill of Rights. I will take it over the Ten Commandments any day. It describes a society where authority can be appealed, where the reach of the powerful is limited by the rights of the people, where the accused are treated fairly, and where the freedoms of thought and expression are guaranteed by law. None of that was derived from the Bible. Ordinary, fallible, mortal human beings, not so different from you or me, came up with that stuff all by themselves. No divine revelations necessary. And though their primary purpose was to create a legal document, not a moral one, by considering the interests of their fellow citizens and their society as a whole, they produced something with more morality in its single handwritten page than we find in the entirety of the Bible, Old Testament and New. Back at the beginning, I framed this topic as a boxing match, the Ten Commandments versus the Bill of Rights. And though that makes for a snappy title, honestly, if such a thing were literally possible, it wouldn't be much of a fight. If you bought a ticket to see it, you'd probably exit the arena grumbling and demanding your money back, because there's no way the Ten Commandments goes the distance. It's overmatched. The Bill of Rights by first round knockout. Thank you once again for having me back. It was nice to see you for what I presume will be the last time.